Good evening. I'm Mark Miller, a Dean at the University of Arizona, James E. Rogers College of Law. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you, those who are far away and those hunkered down in Tucson on what is an unusually cold day by Tucson standards. We're happy to have you all here. Today, when thoughtful, inclusive dialogue is so important to strengthening our civic institutions, we seek to create a forum here for learning and intellectual engagement. Established through the generosity of our 1955 alumnus, Donald Pitt, the Pitt Family Foundation Speaker Series brings some of the nation's most prominent and influential voices in law, democracy, and public policy to our campus. Tonight's program with Dr. Thomas Mann is the 7th talk in this series over the past 2 years, 7th talk in the Pitt Family Foundation Speaker Series. We thank Mr. Pitt and his family for his interest and their support in promoting these critical and well-attended conversations. Today, again, we see a great audience in Arizona and beyond, and the response has confirmed for us the importance of the topics we're discussing and the interest in having them discussed. There will be one more Pitt Series talk this spring by political scientist and author Jan Werner Muller on March 31st. And we're already lining up speakers for the fall. You can find our schedule and hear all the prior talks at law.arizona.edu. The speaker series is an important part of our participatory democracy initiative. That is led by former Tucson Mayor Jonathan Rothschild and was established in part by the generosity of Arizona Law alumni, Mary Greer, Nancy Kelly, and the Hari Trust. With our partners in the School of Government and Public Policy and in the School of Journalism, and under Jonathan's able leadership, we are developing a rich array of training and educational opportunities for students and for opportunities for members of the broader community to learn and to engage. Indeed, our deep partnership with SGPP is highlighted tonight by the participation of my brilliant political science colleague, Dr. Samara Klar, the Melody S. Robideau Foundation Fund Professor and a co-coordinator of the Arizona Policy Lab. Samara studies how individuals' personal identities and social surroundings influence their political attitudes and behavior, often using experimental methods. Dr. Klar will now introduce our speaker, Dr. Mann, and then we'll rejoin him later for Q&A. We will remind you along the way, but please post questions to the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Dr. Klar.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate that extremely kind introduction. But really, it's my privilege to be here to introduce to you Dr. Thomas Mann. Dr. Mann is a senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institute and a resident scholar at the Institute of Governmental Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He earned his doctorate in political science from the University of Michigan, and he has spent his career studying politics from the inside and out. He has taught political science at Princeton, Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, the University of Virginia, and American University. There is an old saying that those who can't do teach. This does not apply to Thomas Mann. Indeed, he does both. He has conducted polls for congressional candidates. He has chaired the board of overseers of the National Election Studies. He has served as an expert witness in constitutional defense, for example, of the McCain-Feingold campaign finance law. He is the former director of the American Political Science Association, and he is widely known not just within the confines of the ivory tower, but he is broadly celebrated for his prolific and widely respected public-facing scholarship. He is known in particular for his work on the systemic reasons for and practical dimensions of high-stakes partisan politics. In 2007, Tom co-authored a book with his longtime collaborator, Norm Ornstein, entitled The Broken Branch: How Congress is Failing America and How to Get It Back on Track. The pair followed that up with a New York Times bestseller entitled "It's Even Worse Than It Looks: How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism." In 2016, Mann and Orenstein updated and revised that book to include more recent examples to support their thesis, which is that acrimony and hyperpartisanship threaten our system of governance. Even more recently, he and Orenstein have teamed up with Washington Post editorialist E.J. Dionne in writing "One Nation After Trump: A Guide for the Perplexed, the Disillusioned, the Desperate, and the Not Yet Deported," to share his views on how we as a nation got to where we are today, and maybe more importantly, how we can get out of here. Please join me in welcoming the esteemed Dr. Thomas Mann.
Unmute. Okay. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Samara and Mark. I very much appreciate your welcome to me here, albeit virtually in Tucson. And of course, thanks to the former mayor, Jonathan Rothschild, for his leadership with the Participatory Democracy Institute. I'm calling in from the deep blue city of Berkeley and the deep blue county of Alameda and the deep blue state of California, where I've lived for the last 7 years. Before that, I spent many years living in Bethesda, Maryland, another deep blue state, and working in the District of Columbia. So it's good to be in a purple state, a state that counts and matters. I was thinking of saying I'm happy of being here, but what I'd say is this is really an interesting time to be in a state, a purple state, that in which the future of American democracy may well be shaped. We are at a perilous time. Can you believe it? I mean, how many people lived through a historical period such as we are in now? It's possible that the major part of the Russian forces surrounding Ukraine have moved in to the country. If not, they likely will soon. We are in the midst of an extraordinary period in which the whole post-Cold War security system for the globe, but Europe in particular, is being called into question. It's very eerie indeed, and there is another global security issue, which is climate change, which has forced its way onto our agenda. But we've also been living through the pandemic of COVID-19, nearing 100,000 deaths in the United States alone. We've seen incredible economic and social disruption, and the problems in our politics have been manifest in our efforts to deal with the pandemic. But of course, our focus today is on American democracy, which has been basically unhinged in the last few years. We've seen democratic backsliding around the globe, but here in the US, it's now deadly serious. We survived the Trump presidency, the 2020 elections, the unprecedented extra-legal and violent challenges to the certification of the victorious candidate. In effect, a a failed coup d'etat. And we have reason to be gratified by those elements in our political system and those individuals, be they in the courts or the bureaucracies and local government, that preserved the peaceful transfer of power. It may have been a bit disorderly, but it was peaceful and decisive. And there's reasons to feel very good about that. But the reality is that the threat could be even worse in 2022 and in particular 2024. You could and can, I think, see the big lie about the election as a dress rehearsal for 2024. We've seen series of actions by state legislatures this year. You, of course, in Arizona, lived through the most incredible and sophomoric election audit that was striking mainly by the extent to which anyone took it seriously. But alas, after all of that, even that audit managed to verify the outcome of the election as reported by election officials in the state. We're seeing a further politicization of election administration. No one knew what secretaries of state did before, but now it's a hotly contested office, and people who embrace the big lie about Biden not really being elected president are credible candidates for that office. And similarly, we see other offices being contested and new laws being written that would lead to a real threatening politicization of election administration, which means we've moved from concerns about vote suppression, not that they've disappeared, they're serious, to one of vote subversion and really the possibility of a real contested election and crisis in 2024. That's particularly the case if Donald Trump is the nominee. So the American system of government, American democracy, American politics is vulnerable, deeply troubled, more so than any time in my life. I've spent most of my years trying to make sense of American politics and government to a more general audience, and had found myself, for the most part, defending our institutions. I defend congressional pay raises, but things are very different right now. And part of our task is to figure out what in the world has happened, and is there anything we can do about it? And if so, how do we get about that work? It's all rooted in sort of culture and institutions. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. The social and cultural divides in our country are deep and growing. The demographic changes are a part of that, but now it's really much more than that. It's about race and religion and education. And the problem, in short, is that our whole political system was designed in which one imagined in a large republic, there would be many, many interests and many of them overlapping. And the idea was, it was the fact that we didn't have one side united against the other would provide the basis of our separation of power systems to work. But it hasn't turned out like that. What has happened in recent decades is that the overlapping cleavages have largely disappeared, and now our two parties are at opposite sides on the most contentious issues of our time. Much of it had to do with race and the consequences, in part, of the second Reconstruction, if you will, the period in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, in which we believed we put an end to Jim Crow and provided a basis for Black Americans to be fully participating in our political and electoral system. But over time, where minorities and Blacks in particular had reasons to be in both parties, certainly the tradition with Lincoln within the Republican Party, but then over time, as the Democratic Party moved to be more active in the progressive period and into the New Deal, moving into the Democratic Party, and that has opened up the even deeper politicization of race in our politics, and it's been joined by religion and education and a whole host of everything. We have tribal politics, almost a visceral hatred of those in the other party, and increasing tolerance for lies and for violence. Parties have now become, as Liliana Mesa has demonstrated, mega identities that we're defined by who we are as Democrats or Republicans, and it shapes our views of issues and views of people. It has really been an extraordinary period, which is at the base of our problems, but it's really more than that. The fact is that American democracy is vulnerable in times of deeply polarized political parties. They aren't well suited to a constitutional system that is winner take all, first past the post, plurality winners. That is to say, somehow they have to absorb all of the different combinations of interest and sharpen the differences to advance their political interest, and that has become embedded in our politics today. In some ways, we have the absolute worst institutional arrangements for the kind of social cleavages and party divisions that exist in our society today. You could imagine us having a parliamentary system, a multi-party proportional representation, where, as in Europe, say an extreme party of the left or right can at best become a junior member of of a majority coalition and provide much less of a threat to the country as a whole. But alas, what has happened is that the extreme politics has centered itself for the most part within one of our political parties, and that's the Republican Party. Now, I don't mean to say that there is no extreme left in America. There are some bits and pieces of it, but it's for the most part marginalized. If you go to elected officials, local, state, national, the left, the Democratic left in politics is not far from the median voter on most things, and those with extreme views, let's say defund the police, is not something that elected officials champion or parties within legislatures at the state or national level do. So it's a very, very different situation. The Republican Party is, as Norm Ornstein and I said, 10 years almost to the day that our book, It's Even Worse Than It Looks, was published, in which we pointed out that, and we were not well received from being a longtime nonpartisan analyst of American politics and having friends on both sides of the aisle. We felt obliged to say what we thought we knew and had learned about the evolution of our politics. And that was the radicalization of the Republican Party, making it an anti-democratic insurgent outlier in our politics. We wrote in the introduction of that book that the Republican Party was ideologically extreme, contemptuous of the inherited policy regime, scornful of compromise, unpersuaded by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition. That last point was absolutely critical. We thought we had dealt with this in the election of 1800, when we actually had a very difficult election, but ultimately a peaceful transfer of power from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. But alas, that has ended. And we are now in a very, very different position. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk about this further, but I think we have to face up to the fact that what we wrote about 10 years ago has not only proven true, but in a much more exaggerated form, to the point of threatening American democracy itself. Now, the one thing I'd add to this is that we have sort of structural anti-majoritarian biases in our system that now produces minority rule. Now, I'm not talking about protection of minority rights, which is what the constitutional law and the rule of law is all about. I'm really talking about decisions made in the electoral arena that do not represent majorities. I'll just rattle it off. The Senate is the worst apportioned legislative body in the democratic world. 2 members per state, whether the state has 300,000 people or 35 million people. It will get to the point, if this continues, the distribution of voters across states that you will see that senators representing 1/5 of the electorate will basically control 70% or 70 of the 100 seats in the United States Senate. Talk about a legitimacy problem, that's it. The Electoral College, of course, which complicates the election. It wasn't intended for an era of mass political participation. It was alas designed for another purpose, but it's with us today. It can't be changed properly without a constitutional amendment, and it provides opportunities for overriding the views of most Americans. The geographical distribution of the population between urban, suburban, and rural populations reinforces the kind of anti-majoritarian character of our political system, and that in turn feeds into the Supreme Court and the Senate filibuster. So right now we're involved in this extraordinary period of conflict, of animus, of negative partisanship, of distrust of every institution of government, because some of our enemies, the people in the other party, have at least partial control of it. And because they're being encouraged by politicians who've come to believe that this is really the best way of gaining power. I mean, the framers, James Madison and company, intended those running for office to be ambitious, to look out for their interests, but they thought that by separating that power among institutions in Washington and having a federal system with a lot of authority residing with others, that you wouldn't be able to get control of our politics in a way that would prevent majorities from deciding how to proceed with governing and be held accountable in subsequent elections for it. So that's the mess. That's the mess that we're in right now. It's just simply unbelievable, and I don't doubt that Vladimir Putin thought this was a good time to challenge America and the West because of what's been happening in our politics, and because he thinks and knows he has a very visible supporter on the extreme right, and Tucker Carlson, and of course Donald Trump. So it makes us vulnerable in many ways, but it's made us vulnerable in dealing with the pandemic. It just breaks your heart to see the correlation between the percent of the vote for Donald Trump in 2020 and the percentage of deaths per 100,000 population from the pandemic. You see it in the anti-vaxxers. You see it in virtually every important aspect of our politics. So what do we do about it? I'm a small D Democrat. I don't believe in it's possible to have direct democracy. the 335 million people couldn't do that very well. We have representative government. We try to have representative government, but it's simply not possible to carry on indefinitely in which one of our parties really believes in an illiberal system that is enchanted with Hungary and Viktor Orban, who has become an autocrat, more sympathetic to Putin and Erdogan and Bolsonaro, and it's really almost impossible for people to get together in a legislative setting, working with the president to try to deliberate, negotiate, and come to some kind of reasonable solution. And we always are on the edge now of having an election outcome challenged and throwing us into chaos with the possibility of moving like others have to a system that was once democratic and now is something very different from that. I'm deeply skeptical of any efforts that say we just need to get people to come together and talk to one another. We find when they do that, they become more intensely committed to the views they came into things with. So we've got to think in different ways. If right now, only about a quarter of Republicans believe that Joe Biden was legitimately elected as president, that's 3/4 who don't. I mean, how could that be possible given how the election was conducted and tallied and challenged, entered the courts, and there simply wasn't any evidence of anything consequential amiss in our elections, and yet there we were, and there we still are. So what do? At an immediate level, we have to protect the integrity of elections. And for that, we need citizens to care about this as an important issue. And we need people to run for office that are committed to the truth and to the legitimate, nonpartisan, non-political administration of elections. I think any election that puts in place a person, be they Republican or Democratic, that has discretion over aspects of the conduct or counting of elections, those campaigns need to be visible and people have to be actively involved in them. Secondly, we need to mobilize pro-democracy forces in both parties. That's not the kind of issue that ordinarily tends to excite electorates, but it's exceedingly important now. The third is somehow our federal system is failing us, and we need to de-link state and local politics from national politics. If you really look to see what's happened, is the same political organizations, donors, issues that are visible in national politics are visible in state and local politics now, and we see activity around oftentimes issues that only are designed to demonize our opponents further. In some ways, the best hope of governing is really in metropolitan areas where the issues are such that they don't align naturally with the stuff of the culture wars nationally. Those are big topics and big issues, but I hope we have them on our agenda. And I'll end with this: the most important thing we need to do is remake or replace the Republican Party. If you are a Republican, the best thing you could do is support candidates in primary elections or in general elections that are not taken with conspiracy theories, that do not pay homage to the great leader, that understand the spirit of what our democratic system is about. It's very hard. The incentives are such that Mitch McConnell plays it safe. He is not a leader of the pro-democracy forces, but he's worried about it. But he still wants a majority of members, and it doesn't pay to pick fights with Donald Trump or others who are on that bandwagon. Remember, the Whig et al. Party of the 1850s was replaced by the new Republican Party, and Abraham Lincoln became their candidate in 1860, and the course of history was changed. It's possible, but our system, a two-party system, requires two governing parties that accept the legitimacy of their opposition, that believe in science and truth, who are willing to deliberate and negotiate. And those kind of politicians need to appear, and they need to be rewarded by citizens and encouraged by them. Because if we don't replace the Republican Party and it gains full power again, I think we face a very bleak future. But the positive part of that is very much in the spirit and theme of this lecture series, which is to do one's best to provide a well-educated, civically oriented citizenry that will take serious the challenges, that will not fall prey to QAnon or any other such conspiracy theorist, and who will help us get back. Mind you, going back is always not so great. Our history is checkered in so many ways, but hey, we've got a long operating democratic system of government and a nation that's really made a lot of constructive changes in itself and in the world, and it's worth our efforts to help it along in this very difficult time. Let me stop there. I want to hear from you.
I'm trying to get my video to start up again, but I will have to get permission for that. But in the meantime, you can hear me, Tom?
I can.
Okay, great. I'm going to have to get permission to start my video, but I will seek that out in a moment. We are getting lots of questions about sort of the future. I'm sure your favorite activity is to predict the future, of course, but particularly people are interested, there we go. People are interested in sort of forecasting how some predictable future events or maybe unpredictable future events might affect all of this. The first one that we are getting questions about is the possibility for the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So we have a questioner asking how you think the possible overturning of Roe v. Wade might affect polarization. Specifically, could it sort of free up single issue voters who are no longer tied to the pro-life issue to seek out representatives that better represent their other interests? So could it have maybe some unintended consequences of weakening the Republican Party? How do you see the future of Roe v. Wade affecting all of this?
Great question. I'm much better at predicting the past than the future, by the way. It's almost certain that the court will weaken seriously, if not eliminate, Roe v. Wade, and that we will see a return to state politics on the regulation of abortion. In some states that are deeply blue, it will be easy. It's already happening. Some laws are on the books already. But there are a number of competitive states like Arizona and Virginia and Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where this will be fought out. So it seems to me the incentives will vary depending on where people are. But since a fairly sizable majority of Americans believe that the right to abortion is real and it should be protected, although discouraged, legal access and practical access to abortion, but fewer and fewer abortions should be the objectives, and therefore there will be blowback in a number of states and efforts to appeal to men and women who have concerns about this. But I think it'll transform the world of individuals affected by access to abortion more than it will alter the polarization of our politics.
I want to follow up with, I'm going to maybe bundle a few questions together because we're receiving a number of questions sort of about institutions and how institutional change might affect all of this. So if I could ask you to consider things like the filibuster, which, here in Arizona is a particular hot topic given our senators' diverse views on them. The Electoral College, the extent to which you think the Electoral College might be posing part of the problem here. And then finally, the expansion of the Supreme Court. So those would be sort of three big institutional changes: expanding the court, altering the Electoral College, getting rid of the filibuster. Are any of those plausible solutions? Are any of those effective solutions? Or are those all kind of distractions from the main problem?
Oh, they're far from distractions. They are where our polarization is manifest now. We made the Electoral College mainly work because we had enough Democratic small states to balance out Republican small states, and so you didn't get this divergence between the popular vote and the electoral vote, but the geographical sorting of individuals has really made a difference, and it's a very risky system. I've been involved in an effort that was a sort of interstate compact issue. The idea was to get a number of states to agree to put into law or put into their state constitution that they would cast the electors in their state, whatever the outcome, would cast their votes for the winner of the popular vote nationally. They worked and got up to about 220 electoral votes, or maybe they got as high as 230. But they need 270 for a majority, and they keep trying and they change their plans, but it doesn't seem to be working. So we desperately need a constitutional amendment. That I had that in my list of features of our system that make it problematic. Supreme Court, again, the problem now is that justices are picked on the basis of what they think and who they are and where they come from, and therefore the luck of the draw, who happens to be in the White House when there are vacancies, determines the shape of the court for 30 years going forward. It's truly absurd. No other nation in the democratic world comes close to doing anything like this. And I mean, Trump, the twice impeached, albeit never convicted president, ended up with 3 nominees. He was there one term. One of them was initially a Democratic appointment, but Mitch McConnell simply wouldn't take it up. Merrick Garland would have gotten the vote. So the answer is yes, Supreme Court changes would be justified. I think the best bet is would be, if possible, seeing that there's a regular turnover, 18-year terms, say, for justices. They don't have to stay there and hang on to make sure their president has a choice. And so they would be sequenced in ways in which every president gets to nominate candidates. There is consideration of whether that could be done without a constitutional amendment. I'm dubious, but people are certainly looking into it, but it's very much a problem. On the filibuster, Arizonans, you should be embarrassed by your senior senator. And I say this because if you look at anything she's said or written about the filibuster, it's wrong. She hasn't bothered to go to the history of the filibuster. I mean, political scientists have written extensively about it, and much of it is accessible. And the fact is the filibuster does not promote bipartisan negotiations. It does just the opposite, and it's really become pernicious, and it reinforces the malapportionment that already exists in the Senate because of the 2 per state system that we have. So, I mean, if you're really concerned about debate, you can do that, and ultimately, though, get to a majority vote. The constitutional framers believed that both houses, which were given authority to approve their own rules, would operate by majorities, except for the exceptions they built into the Constitution, like impeaching a president or trade agreements and the such. So it was never anticipated by the framers. It's closely associated with the racial battles and that history throughout our throughout the years, and now it is once again. So it all ought to be done away with, and the Senate is not different from the House because of the filibuster alone. There are many things that make it different, including the number of members and length of term and so on. So yes, it's a mistake. Sinema hasn't defended it in a credible way. She would be flunked if she took one of our courses, right? And those Arizonans who think she's really got something should look closer.
Well, I think actually, Arizona, when I've been in Arizona for 9 years, and when I first moved here, it was an interesting state electorally, but every year it just gets more and more interesting. And I think the future, Sinema's position as well as Mark Kelly will be quite interesting to track, especially given these comments. I want to turn to one additional institution, maybe the most important institution, one might say, in the United States, and that is media. We're getting a lot of questions for you. You know, polarization to a certain extent has always existed. I mean, it's not as though before Trump, Democrats and Republicans were singing Kumbaya and holding hands in, you know, flower beds. But so we're having a lot of questions about what specifically is different. And a lot of our attendees are speculating that it might be today's media environment, cable news, social media. Do you think it's a cop-out to blame the media? To what extent do you think media is at fault? What media sources would you recommend to somebody who is looking for unbiased news?
Yes, media exacerbates the polarization that exists between the parties today, but certainly did not create it. We're a big country. People come from different backgrounds and we're born in different places and lead different lives, and there's bound to be conflict and differences, and people will take their constitutional right to organize and petition government and everything, but in a two-party system, if people's positions on the core issues are in agreement and they go to one party or the other, then polarization is a reality. If those parties are roughly competitive and either one could take the majority in the House and the Senate or win the presidency, then the intense pressure on politicians to support their party because we want to stay in the majority and we want to control the White House. So it was there before we wrote about it, going back to 2006 and then 2012 with it's even worse. So it's been around for a long time, and it will only change with people seeing they have overlap with people of the other party and not just differences. The cleavage structure of society means everything. But of course, the media has made a difference, and particularly social media. I mean, cable news, to be sure, Fox is the distinctive media entity, but its audience is relatively small compared to Facebook and others. But of course, they're on Facebook as well. So every element of the broadcast or cable media is also represented on social media, and you know, the problem there is the algorithms used in particular by Facebook that kind of reinforces divides and divisions, and that has sort of made it much worse. So I really support the effort, by the way, to create new media entities in the states where state coverage of politics has mostly disappeared. There are nonprofits starting up all over. There are investigative journalism organizations. The same thing is happening on the web, and it's just important to create some alternatives and to use the regulatory powers to keep large tech companies from determining who we communicate with.
Great. You know, I sort of make you go back and forth on topics, but we are getting so many questions about institutions, particularly the court, and I think that reflects sort of the legal expertise of our audience. There is such low trust in the Supreme Court, really low trust for institutions across the board, which we know is a consequence of affective polarization. What do you think institutions like the Supreme Court that are largely viewed at this point as sort of a partisan, Supreme Court justices are largely viewed as partisan now. That's how people see them. They think of a Supreme Court justice as somebody there to represent the ideology of the president who appointed them. What, if anything, can the Supreme Court, to name one, do to sort of take back their credibility with the American public, if anything?
Chief Justice Roberts has worried about this since he came on the court many years ago, and keeps trying to tell his colleagues, we've got to protect the credibility and legitimacy of the court. It can't be seen as simply pawns of the political party that appointed us. And Roberts has made some decisions that were designed to avoid the worst of this. I mean, keeping Obamacare alive, it was a weird way of doing it, but he did it. That would have just created war, and he was on the side of the majority of Americans. But now he's outnumbered on the court. There are 5 justices that think differently, but I just think it's educational and moral suasion of talking to the Kavanaughs and Barrett, Amy Comey Barrett, and I don't think Gorsuch and Alito are going to be very helpful on this, nor Justice Thomas. But it's a way of, in the short term, just trying to say that the court's reputation or trust has dropped about 15 points in the last decade. It's still higher than the Congress or the media or the presidency, and so it's the rituals of the court help it, but it's being overwhelmed by the political organizations that have sought to dominate it, and that's very, very unfortunate.
Turning to the extremist wing that you see within the Republican Party, if, let's say, your wish came true and the Republican Party were remade in sort of the image of sort of something that would better represent most of the American public, what do you think would happen to that extremist wing? This is a question coming from one of our audience members. Do you think they would find potentially a more extreme alternative? Would they sort of just become silent and go away? What's the end game there?
Yeah, they wouldn't. They certainly wouldn't give up. And the real question is, how large are they, if not reinforced by a presidential candidate or a president, or if so one hope is that they'd be absorbed, and that we'd see sort of economic issues once again beginning to rise as a basis of difference and conflict between the parties. Right now, it's race and religion and immigration and the like, and those are not issues that can be negotiated. So that's the trick. What we really need is a multi-party system with proportional representation, so that an extreme right or extreme left can form its own party and maneuver in that fashion. But ultimately, you'd need to put together a coalition that would be a governing coalition. The problem is our separate elections of Congress and the president, of course. So you could try changing the way in which presidents are elected and have ranked choice voting and eliminate some of that problem. But basically, we have an overall structural problem. It's just a terrible fit when we have parties of the sort that we have today.
Right. I mean, one of the issues with institutional change is it's so difficult for somebody who is elected with a certain system to then want to change that system because the system worked for them. So what do you see as sort of plausible, realistic changes that we might actually see in our lifetime, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The most important things are constitutional changes, and it's so easy now. In fact, the people who are pushing for a new constitutional convention are part of the extreme right, trying to get a number of states to sign on, and they have a whole list of things they want to do that wouldn't solve our problem. So it's almost as if we need a convention that we had in Philadelphia again, that is, throw out the Articles of Confederation and start anew. So I don't think we'll get it. So here's what I think. The only choice now, and it seems partisan, but it's all I see, which is the Democrats are a governing, compromising party. They have to be, because they represent a more diverse set of people, and that's who they are. Even the squad members are compromisers. They aren't wild crazies. At least when they are, they can't get a hearing in their own political party. So our system with elections every 2 years means even when, as the case with Biden, a president gets a majority in both houses of Congress. In this case, it's so fragile, 3 or 4 seats in the House, and it's 50-50 in the Senate with the VP selecting. Midterm elections almost always go against the party in power, and that means the party of the president. And so we then end up back in the mess we're in, and we can't get anything done. I think the only way the Republican Party changes is if Democrats win 3 landslide elections in a row, and the Republican Party says, we can't survive like this. We'll be a permanent minority. And then other people and other forces arise. The last thing we want is a permanent Democratic majority. Our system needs competition and turnover and power, but right now the only way to change that party without constitutional change, which they and others prevent from happening, is to make them face electoral defeat. And of course, we look to 2022, and unless people act in a way that hasn't been evident historically, if they see this as an existential period in our life, and mobilize and majorities rule, Republicans will certainly control the House, and they have a good shot at the Senate as well. And then Biden is there, and he'll veto crazy stuff, but it means nothing will get done. So that's my answer. For 3 significant Democratic elections in a row, and we'll have a new Republican Party.
Well, I mean, some commenters are suggesting that might be a little fantastical, but the fact is, I believe you can correct me, we have had 3 consecutive national popular vote victories for the Democrats.
We certainly have. In fact, it's even more than that. We've had you're right about the 3 consecutive. We've had 7 out of the 8 last elections. The Democrats have won the popular vote. So
your prediction may not be as sort of wild as some are suggesting, but I'm not sure if you would feel comfortable answering this, although I get the feeling that you are comfortable answering most things. How would you assess the Biden presidency thus far, given sort of, I think there was a lot of anticipation that he might be able to quell some of the affective polarization. It doesn't seem that has happened. I don't know if that was a realistic prediction. What do you think? How would you assess the presidency? And I think this may actually be a closing question. So feel free to
President Biden talked and felt like President Obama did initially. We have to come together. We're not red states and blue states. We are the United States of America. And people love hearing that, even though most of them don't believe it. But they love hearing it, and they want it to be that way. But it isn't that way. And it took a while for Obama to discover that, but discover it he did. But by then he had lost his majority in the Congress, and it was problematic. Biden lived his whole life like that in the Senate, and so wanted to do the same thing, made the efforts. But remember, the American Rescue Package, the first thing he passed, didn't get a single Republican vote in the House or the Senate. So, but he was determined to get something on the broad infrastructure. But of course, he couldn't keep it together with Manchin in particular. So they couldn't get the majority in reconciliation. But if you just look objectively at what's happened, it's been extremely productive period in our politics in terms of what has gotten done. The most rapid economic recovery in modern history, in terms of growth, in terms of jobs. People got money in their pockets that they put in the bank and they spent some, and so we reduced poverty. It really was quite extraordinary. I mean, lots to criticize about COVID policy, but in general, they really speeded it up and mobilized government resources. And what they couldn't do is counter the opposition in red states, who simply made it a badge of dishonor to get vaccinated, even if the elite Republicans were quietly getting vaccinated to preserve themselves. Afghanistan was a mess. I think we would have had to stay to prevent a mess. That is to say, I don't think making it longer, taking more time would have helped. So I'm skeptical of that, but it certainly hurt him. I think the Delta variant and the withdrawal from Afghanistan cost him 10 points, and he's still there. But I think the quality of appointees is high. Sort of very able people who know and care about government. I mean, the contrast with Trump is sort of day and night. And what gives you the chills is thinking what would have happened with Russia and Ukraine if Trump were in office. He would have given away Ukraine, even though he didn't own it. I mean, we came very close to utter disaster. And Biden is not charismatic or inspiring, but he sort of gets it right, and he's sensible, even if we don't like to listen to long speeches. So I think on important grounds, he's been successful, but to truly be successful, he needs to keep a Democratic Senate if he can't have the House for important appointments and the like, and then either himself or someone else running as a Democrat gets elected again. Otherwise, so much of it could be undone. But he could be seen as a pivotal president, probably will, for good or for ill, depending on how things unfold.
Well, thank you so much. On that note, we are going to have to close our session for tonight. We have questions that would keep us here all night long for sure, but out of respect to your time and our audience members, I will say thank you so much. This has just been fascinating. It's really been our privilege to have you here speaking with us tonight. So thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
And I know there are upcoming lectures in the series, so I'm not sure if Mark, you wanted to say something about that. But thank you so much, everybody, for participating tonight and for the really great questions.
Bye-bye.